Hello, my name is Vince Cerf. I'm Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. And I really appreciate an opportunity to talk to you about your interest in the Internet Governance Forum and Internet matters in general. By this time, many of you are making heavy use of applications on the Internet, and maybe some of you are contributing to the further spread of access to Internet and making it more available and more useful. And you will have figured out that there are a lot of things that are very powerful and useful about the internet and its applications on the World Wide Web. But you've also figured out that there are hazards and risks associated with the online environment. This is a complex ecosystem and it needs work. We need a safer and more secure internet for people to rely on. And that will fall to some of you to develop new technologies and to adopt new policies and to implement new facilities and new capabilities to create a safer environment for everyone. Some of that relates to strong authentication of identity, the use of two-factor authentication, the use of public key cryptography in order to maintain strong identification and also integrity of content so that people can't alter things and misrepresent things. But this is not just a technological challenge, it's also a political and regulatory challenge. What's happening today around the world is that governments are seeing the internet as a potential threat in the following sense. For authoritarian governments, the threat might be disruption of the government by people who don't like the authority of that government. And so their response to this is to find a way to control who does what on the internet, who says what, who is allowed to get access to what information. That's an understandable reaction, even if we don't necessarily agree with it. But there's the other side in the more democratic governments. There's still a big concern about what's going on the internet, what content is available, particularly as we worry about misinformation, disinformation, political disruption, polarization among the electorate, to say nothing of the general population. And so those governments are also worried about protecting not themselves so much, but the population from harm. This also induces a need for international cooperation for law enforcement, for example, because the harms that can be perpetrated through this online environment can occur across international boundaries. And that means that in order to identify and apprehend parties who are harming others through the internet, we may need other governments to cooperate with each other in order to capture, identify, and bring those harmful parties to justice. So this translates into more international agreements and cooperation in the law enforcement space. More generally, even outside of laws, there is a need for norms of behavior to be widely adopted. The Global Council for the Stability of Cyberspace has generated something like a dozen or more recommended norms. The first one of which had to do with protecting the core infrastructure of the internet from deliberate attack. That's the routers and the domain name system and the root servers and other parts of the BGP routing systems, all essential components of the way the internet operates. It's considered that they should be protected against deliberate attack. And so that's an example of a norm that could be adopted. At some point, some of those norms could turn into real treaty agreements that are enforceable. But even if they're not enforceable, it's still a good idea to surface those kinds of ideas and to advocate for their adoption. And so I would urge all of you to think in this broad context about making the internet safer and more secure for everyone, so as to allow ourselves to build more applications that we can rely on that improve our daily lives. One last point to be made about all of this technology is that it is technology, and technology is never perfect, nor is it necessarily always reliable. And so I've come away with a certain amount of concern over the smartphone, as remarkable an instrument as it is, and it's turning into something you can use for medical evaluations and detecting of medical conditions. You could use it for streaming audio and video, for conferencing like we would be doing now if I were there live with you. So all those applications are there. But when it doesn't work for some reason, like the battery is dead or internet access isn't available, either the Wi-Fi doesn't work or the 4G or 5G isn't available, then suddenly a whole lot of things don't happen because the device isn't workable. And you end up with a kind of a cascade effect when, because of this not working, then that doesn't work. And then because that doesn't work, something else doesn't work. So we should be very concerned about the reliability of these systems and also the ability to do something else as backup in case the system doesn't work. And so those of you who are responsible for designing products that are programmable and use networks and so on should think how to make them more resilient in the face of possible failures. That even goes so far as to have two-factor authentication with backup passwords that you can use if the two-factor system isn't working. So I will leave it to you to fashion your own future, fashion your own response to these challenges, because you will inherit them, like it or not. People like me will eventually go on to our whatever reward we've earned, and you will be responsible for making the internet better. And I'm sure that many of you will rise to that challenge. So I'm sorry I can't be there in person to greet you and have this conversation, but perhaps we'll cross paths on the net.